Greetings everyone, I'm Steve. I'm here to sort of warm you up a bit to think about our permaculture design course, which is starting just over 4 weeks from now, in the beginning of January. And we're going to take you on a 24-week journey, for those who are interested. Firstly, really starting with the principles of permaculture and where it's come from and the key ideas, the universal ideas, the things that actually join us all together. And then we're going to look, in the second part of the course, we're going to look at how we might apply those ideas, the techniques and strategies that we might use, which obviously are going to vary depending on what our needs are, what resources we have, and where we are physically in the world. But still, all of these processes have a sort of a universality to it, so it's something very interesting and useful to look at it in that light. And then the third part of the course is thinking about how you apply these ideas to yourself and to your own home situation, and that's where it becomes really, really interesting. And we want to share these stories. We want to really encourage everyone who is part of this course to tell us about how they are working with those ideas, how they resonate with you, and how you've managed to apply them in your own setting. So that's where we're headed. I wanted to lay some background and some context, and hopefully sort of warm up anyone who is interested in joining us on this journey. And so firstly, I wanted to just show you this book, Permaculture 1. This was where it all began. 1978 was the first edition of Permaculture 1, co-authored by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. At the time, Bill Mollison was a professor at university in Tasmania, I believe, and David Holmgren was a student, one of his students, who was interested in writing a thesis on food forests, on permanent agriculture systems based around perennials. They searched for a word that might summarise, what in the vocabulary, a sort of a permanent-based agriculture system, and somewhat revealingly discovered that word didn't exist, which kind of challenged them to create a concept which would summarise these points. And this is where the word permaculture came from, the sort of joining together of permanence and agriculture, and then slowly realizing that really agriculture is an expression of human culture. So permaculture, permanent culture. What would that look like? How do we have to think and behave? Because it's quite clear that our current trajectory for our society, our economy is crash and burn. And well, maybe we're happy with that. Maybe we can just go with it for a while and accept that we in the process of nourishing ourselves, we're actually destroying the ecosystem that we're part of. I suspect that not everyone is happy with that, and especially those, we're thinking about future generations. It's certainly not a moral position. It's not a sensible position. So I think there's a big picture context for permaculture, and you might not be someone who's too concerned about the big picture and the long term. I get it, and that's fine. And I think within the PDC, we're going to look at the micro. We're going to look at, from an individual, from the self out. We're going to look at the world from the self out. But at this moment, I want to just talk about that bigger picture, because I think this is, for many of us, is really deeply alarming. Now, recently, a couple of people have spoken to me and they asked me about climate change, and they say, look, Steve, is it really real? Is it as bad as they say? Can we trust governments? We know we've been lied to about so many other things. And also it seems that governments, especially the Western most powerful governments, want to use the climate agenda to sort of create some kind of new world order, a sort of a reset, and perhaps a disempowering of people. Now, you might not be wrong to have those concerns, whenever there is, if you've looked at Naomi Klein's does disaster capitalism, sort of line of thinking, is that when things go wrong, that's when governments exercise their muscles and take more power away from the people, and you use it as an excuse to take it for themselves. I think that happens. And will governments do this over climate? Yeah, probably they'll try. Does that mean that the climate agenda is incorrect or wrong? No. And that's the difference. The governments will leverage any opportunity that they can to claim more power and control for themselves. That seems to be what they want to do. The antithesis to all of that is permaculture. I think it's the most important and valid idea in the world right now, and really worthy of study. Let's just talk a bit about this climate change thing a little bit more though. And firstly, so the first principle in permaculture is observe and interact. In other words, make conclusions from your own observations. Go away and test the information that you receive. Don't really believe or trust any individual, any single source of information, but go and check it out. So what we do know, we can all observe and we can all see and sense and feel, experiencing how climate is changing. Regular patterns of weather are being disrupted. We seem to be getting extremes of hot and cold, drought, deluge of these really intense weather events. Yes, they've always happened. Yes, we've always had these things have happened, but never with this frequency and this intensity and with this sort of escalating occurrence of it. We do need to pay attention. Now, here in the West, we're part of a very complex market economy. We're not directly reliant on the natural world, on weather systems, on rainfall to get our food. We get our food from Tesco's, we go to the shops, we buy it. So as we enter into increasing ecological challenges, we will experience that as an economic problem. We'll be talking about, why is the price of food going up? Can we change interest rates and tweak the economy to make, some such strategies to make food affordable? Well, the reason the price of food is going up is because it's becoming scarce because we have erratic weather. So what actually is an ecological problem, we experience as an economic problem. And therefore, we're not really paying attention to the right metrics. That's part of the reality, and that's how we might go around thinking that all of this hysteria around climate change, it's an external problem, it's a long-term problem, it's not something I want to worry about. It's already affecting us, and as we see prices rise and we see availability of things change, this is to do with the fact that collectively the global economy is eroding into and running down the ecological capital of the planet. That's the trees, the soils, the plants, the forests, everything. The things that actually are responsible for homeostasis, for regulating rainfall and climate and humidity and all of these other things. Actually, these things are regulated by the interaction of the natural world. Different elements, multiple elements within the natural world. As we erode into that, as we simplify it, then we start getting these more exaggerated peaks and troughs or intensities of hot and wet and dry and cold and all of the other variables. So what do we know? What do we know about climate change? And I think that I'm kind of stunned, actually. I think we have not been very well educated about it. I think that people that were paying attention to this in the 90s have a deeper understanding than many people do today. And that's just because the way the media works. The media is bored of these issues. They've talked about it in the past. They feel like they've moved on. we might even be forgiven for thinking that governments have solved the problem. I mean, we do actually have the Paris Agreement in place, and that's the strategy that's supposed to save us from runaway climate change. It's supposed to make maximum change to be no more than 2 degrees centigrade, and it set a more ambitious target of 1.5. Now, this was December 2015, so that's now 7 years ago that the Paris Agreement was signed. And interestingly, I think it's the only international treaty which has been ratified by all, I don't know how many countries are on the world, there's something like 200. All 200 nations signed this. Now, actually at the time, there were 2 that didn't. One was Syria, they weren't there, they were having a civil war. And the other was Nicaragua, that really wanted to make the point that the targets in the Paris Agreement are no way ambitious enough. They have both since signed. Of course, we then had the Trump presidency. Donald Trump did not want to go along with the climate agenda. He talked about withdrawing the United States from that. And of course, that has been reinstated with the commencement of the Biden administration. So everyone has signed this. And so what is the Paris Agreement? I think we need to start by talking about it. Now, there's some great videos and things out there that I can reference, and I will. But for summary, I'm going to talk about it now. And firstly, let's just say, what is the IPCC? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Who are they? What is it? How did it come about? Should we be paying attention to them? Or should we be critical of them? And of course the IPCC is responsible for these COP summits, of which we've now had, I believe, 27. COP meaning Conference of Partners. It's supposed to be a global partnership because it's a global problem. We still got this crazy idea in our heads about one country and another, and one race and another, and we see all this separateness. But really, you have to understand, planet Earth is at the highest level is a single interconnected ecosystem. We're all breathing the same air. We're all, if you like, swimming around in the same film of air and water that surrounds the Earth. There's no separateness at that level. So we have to approach solving these kinds of problems as partners, as a conference of partners. That's what it is. But of course, now the biggest culprits, if we're going to point the finger behind the climate problem, the biggest source of the climate change gases, and it's not just carbon dioxide, it's sulfur dioxide, it's methane. The origins of most of the climate change driving gases are coming from our long-term addiction and accelerating use of fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are largely made of carbon, and carbon that was laid down millions of years ago in the Earth's crust that we've now dug up and we're basically releasing all at the same time. It took 300 million years, was it? I was losing the scale, 60 or 600 million years. Anyway, a long time. It took a long time for this organic matter to be trapped in the earth and to form coal, gas and oil. And we've dug it up and combusted it in comparison in a very short space of time, practically all at once. And that's the backbone of the problem. Now, what's happened is, as the COP summits have become more serious and more important, is the oil companies, if you like, the culprits, if you like, have become more and more involved in it because they want to control the process. They're worried about their short-term futures, their short-term profits. They're not thinking in the long term at all, and they don't have any other business model to go to. So, should we trust the IPCC? Should we trust what's going on at the COP summits? Well, it's good to be skeptical. It really is. But let's let's just take a few steps back, because what we need to understand is, so this is who the IPCC is. It is the coming together of governments and increasingly corporations now with the scientists. And the scientists are saying, this is what the data is, this is what we know, and this is what we understand we need to aim for. And the governments and the corporates are saying, okay, well, this is what you want, but this is what we're able to do. So everything that's come out from the IPCC, you have to understand, it's a conversation between governments and corporates and the actual science. So IPCC is not the official, the last word on the climate problem. They're the compromise. They're the coming together of those two different opposites. If it was down to the pure scientists, we would have fixed this problem a long time ago. And in fact, let me just give you a little bit of history. 1992 was the Rio Earth Summit. That was the first time all the nations of the world came together on a single platform to talk about these long-term ecological challenges that we're causing, that development, our style of development is causing. And the conclusion of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit was, whoa, this was to say we're on the wrong path of development, that we're eroding international natural capital at a rate which is truly unsustainable, and we have to find a different path to sustainability. That was 1992. That information was enough for me to make significant changes in my own life, and for me to begin to explore what that different path of development might be. Now, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I've been thinking about it in quite a deep way for 30 years now, and that's part of what I want to share on this course. So was that the great turning point that it should have been? Well, no. And in fact, global emissions have gone up by about 60 or 65% since that time. So we can say some of the significant, most damaging pollution that has happened since we clearly were told that it was a problem. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, that's pretty revealing, right? Okay, so we didn't pay attention. We thought it all felt too distant and long term, and in the meantime, hey, we were having an oil party. We were, as Kurt Vonnegut said, to the next generation, please forgive us. We were drunk on oil. And maybe we were, maybe we still are, on the ease, that this incredibly condensed form of energy that we can use so many different ways. I mean, our whole economy is dependent on it. So to even begin to question how we get away from fossil fuels is absolutely, I mean, for some people, they just can't even begin to think about that. Can't. But you have to understand, it was only 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that this all was just beginning. So we have to engage with our problem-solving minds, and we have to allow ourselves to think differently. So what happened is the scientists, the governments, the corporates came together 2015 in Paris to set the targets, and these targets were a compromise. If it was down to the scientists, they would be much more ambitious, and I think they need to be much more ambitious. So let's just say that the Paris Agreement gives a framework that we know we have to beat. And this, how we do that, is up to us, not to allow governments and corporates to dictate to us what we must or must not do. Go and buy an electric vehicle, go and do this, do that. It's not about being told what to do. It's about us, the people of this planet, making a decision about what kind of future we want, and to define that through our own actions and thoughts and our own solidarity. Because remember, this is a conference of partners. We're all in this together. We're all stakeholders in planet Earth. And we're not in a position where we have fantastic wealth that we think is going to protect ourselves from these challenges as they befall us. So, the poorer we are, the more vulnerable we are to these challenges. So that's worth mentioning. So the Paris Agreement came up with some very clear targets, and I've summarized them on this graph, and I'm going to explain what they are. And this is the best scientific advice. So whether, say, corporate power and government power chooses to use this as a thing to oppress the people, that's a separate issue. But this is what we know is real. And the amount of data on the climate problem is absolutely staggering, okay? So we've been measuring, scientists around the world have been measuring all of these variables now for many decades. There's no debate within the scientific community about whether this is happening. The only debate is just how bad it is, just how urgent it is. And again, that's what you have to understand, is we have to focus on the response, not the worrying about the degree of the problem. So the first line on this, and here we are, starting here, is this shows a descent curve. Okay, so this is our current global emissions measured in billions of tons of carbon dioxide. And in 2015, the time when the Paris Agreement was held, the world's emissions were anticipated by 2020, it's 2 years ago, would be about 40 billion tons per year, 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. So what the first line, this incredibly steep line, says is we have to stop polluting, and we have to do it as quickly as possible. So after much discussion, thinking about what's attainable, as what we might like to do would be to do this much quicker and more steeply and much more effectively. But there was many realities. We have all of this baked in momentum. We all own cars. Our primary transport system involves maintaining roads and driving on them, and we have agriculture system that requires petrochemical inputs in terms of fertilizers and pest control and so forth. So we can't just jump straight to zero. So what we were told back then was, in this first decade, from 2020 to 2030, the world has to halve its emissions. That's the target, to drop from 40 to 20 billion tons per year. That's step one. Step two is the second decade. So this is a 30-year transition, and we're only just beginning on it. So, imagine if you're 20 years old now, say you're just coming out of university, or you're just starting your first job, or whatever, this is your whole active life in front of you. These 3 decades define what the future will be. And in fact, it's this decade that's so critical because it sets us on the path. So look, in this decade, we've got to halve emissions. In the next decade, we have to halve emissions again, from 20 down to 10. And in the third decade of transition, we have to halve again from 10 to 5. There's an admission, there's a realization that we're never going to get to zero, because there's some things that might be relatively easy to fix, other things are going to be incredibly difficult or impossible. So the agreement allows ourselves to carry on polluting, but by 5 billion tons a year rather than 40. So that's a different kind of world. That's a different economy, that's a different energy use and different patterns of settlement. It's huge, it's absolutely huge. Is that enough? Well, actually, more realistically, we should be trying to achieve this in probably 2 decades, not 3. But hey, let's not split hairs at this point, because we're not really even on the path yet. So we've really got got to wake ourselves up. So there's 3 lines on this graph. The second one is let's look at this one. This one here, which is supposed to be about CO2 removal, carbon capture and storage. So at these COP summits, there's always been a lobby group to say, yeah, okay, we're putting all of this carbon out into the atmosphere, but we can use technology to remove it. We can create machines, big suction things, whatever, that somehow pull CO2 out of the air and turn it into limestone or something like that. We inject it into the earth and we'll be fine. The problem with that is, yeah, sure, let's invent those things, but they don't exist currently. Or let's say the ones that do are really prototypes that are a long, long way off from being able to actually make significant differences. So in this graph, we're actually, the Paris Agreement said, yeah, sure, let's have some technology, let's help solve this problem with technology. But over the next 30 years, that technology is probably only going to achieve a removal of 5 billion tons a year. And that 5 billion tons kind of conveniently equates to the 5 billion that we're admitting we're not going to be able to get rid of. So that brings us to this point here, this joining point here, where actually, what we said, this is what they mean by net zero, okay? This is when, okay, we're going to still have some emissions, but we're going to have a technology that's going to help remove it. So what's the third line? That's how we get to net zero. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to achieve it by 2050. And if we can get there by 2045 or 2040, so much the better. It's not a matter of, oh, well, we've got 30 years, we can wait. We've already left it too late. We've already given ourselves a massive, massive challenge. So we've got to do better. The third line is very, very interesting, really, this is agriculture. And what it's saying is, land use, okay, more specifically land use. The way that we farm, ploughing and so forth, is responsible for at least 5 billion tons, 5 gigatons of emissions. And this is the thing I think I'm most interested in, actually, is this part of the graph. And I think as people are interested in permaculture, we should all be most interested in this part of the graph. The Paris Agreement sets the challenges. Can we flip farming and land use and also all those many things that we could group under that heading? Can we change that from being a net emitter to actually being a net sequestrator? Instead of emitting 5 billion tons a year, can we lock 5 billion tons a year back into the earth through trees and forests, but ultimately into the soils, where that carbon then becomes actually a long-term asset. Carbon-rich soils tend to be more fertile. Carbon-rich soils tend to be able to hold water for longer and absorb and hold water and reduce flooding and many, many other benefits. So I think permaculture's got so much to contribute when it comes to land use, food, farming, in relation to wildlife, ecosystems and habitats, and understanding that healthy natural ecosystems are net sequestrators of carbon. So we can help reduce the problem, damp down some of the worst effects by actually switching our whole land management strategies. And that's what we're going to be talking about and exploring through the PDC. So, look, you can go away and read about this stuff yourself. There's an awful lot of research doing on it. And if you want to disbelieve me or find the whole climate thing too hard to take on board, look, that's the bigger picture. And maybe as individuals, we don't have to worry too much about that bigger picture, because we've got to think about how we're going to navigate ourselves through this ever-changing world. So, and again, this has been a lifetime of study for me, so it's very, very hard just to paraphrase it in a few things. But I've I've seen these changes in my lifetime, and I, simplistically, I know, but back in the 60s when I was a kid, we went on holiday, we'd have to stop several times to clean the windshield of the car because it was so, literally covered in insects to the degree that you couldn't see through it. I mean, that just doesn't happen anymore. That's a symptom of a very, very significant change. I remember seeing, again as a child, seeing on the road where frogs were migrating across the road, perhaps to go and spawn, um, and they get run over by cars. But it left a carpet, like a leathery carpet of solid matter of dead frogs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that have been run over. You don't see that anymore. You do not see that. You might see the odd one. You're lucky if you see a frog. These are very small anecdotes, but that give a little glimpse to understand how much we have eroded into the natural world, into natural capital, in the space of my short lifetime. I'm 59. So I've seen all of this happen in those years, and obviously that's just a snapshot of this much bigger, longer term picture. So whether we're worried about saving the world or not, or contributing to this big picture, that's the background that we have, okay? So we can flip that and go, I don't know how to deal with global problems. For me, the most important thing is how I'm going to meet my own needs. And that's really where the PDC begins. And invite you on this journey to say, let's all think about how we're going to each meet our own needs. Food, finance, housing, the things that we know we absolutely can't do without. And we're also going to ask the question are there ways that we can work with each other to enable us to meet our own needs more effectively? And then the third part is, can we work together to meet our own needs more effectively in a way in which nourishes and reinforces and harmonizes with that natural world that we have so damaged through short-term thinking? That's the premise of the whole thing. And I don't see why we can't get most of the people across the whole world thinking in these ways. I really, maybe I'm just naive and stupid, but I do think to me, it seems clear it's in all of our best interests, because it's about our own quality of life. From the moment we step into a permaculture mindset, our own quality of life starts to change, because we feel we're part of something. And instead of having all this anxiety about whether it's, some people worry about the big picture, climate and the planet, deforestation stuff. Other people really don't, but they worry about their own personal security or their income security or what kind of society their kids are going to grow up into. And those are all really totally understandable. We don't all have to be globalists. Because I also think we might, I'm very much, so when I first came across the environmental movement in, let's say, late 70s, when I started thinking about these things, going to the early 80s, they used very much the slogan, think global, act local. And I've put that as a sort of a headline for this PDC, because I want you to think global, to be aware. We are thinking global. We're being impacted by these global changes. But we can only respond to them. We're not governments. We're not global corporations. We can only respond to them as individuals in our own communities, starting from the sort of our own centre outwards. That's the best that we can do. And wrestling with these issues is the beginning then of that whole process of transformation. And whether we get to win in the end, we probably won't get to find out, or whether we save the planet or not, or maybe these are irrelevant thoughts. Let's take it right back to our quality of life today, right now, and tomorrow, or the next hour, the next days, the next weeks, the next months. because that's something we can get into perspective and I think we can get a handle on. So permaculture is that journey, and we're going to start in a month. We're going to try and find lots of engaging and useful ways to present the material and to make it accessible as possible. And there you go. So we call ourselves Sector 39. We're a loose network of teachers, practitioners, students, learners, mentors, friends, allies who are fascinated by these ideas and actually who know we can make a difference in the short term, the immediate, in the local, and who knows how that might stack up and how that might affect the global. So I invite you to join us on this journey. Please get in touch. Sector 39, you'll find us on usual social media. Reach out and let's talk, and let's get on this. Let's get this journey underway. Thank you very much for listening, and expect more from us soon.